You drive past the building every day on your way to work. Third floor, Unit 4C, blinds always shut, mail piling under the door slot. The leasing office has had the same now LEASING move-in special banner hanging since spring. You have counted the dark windows at night like a kid counting stars, and you have gotten past 40. Then your renewal notice arrives. Rent going up $180 a month. Not on the empty building across the street. On yours. The one with the banner. The one with the mail nobody collects. My name is Horizon, and I want to tell you about the single strangest fact in American housing right now. Empty apartments are going up in price, not despite the vacancies, because of them. Somewhere in the building you live in, there is a piece of software deciding it is more profitable to leave a unit dark than to rent it to you for less. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how that decision gets made. Let's start with the part that should not be possible. For 100 years, more or less, rent followed a rule simple enough to explain to a 10-year-old. Empty apartments mean landlords compete for tenants. Competition means lower prices. Full buildings mean landlords hold the power. Full buildings mean higher prices. It is Econ 101, and it is the reason your parents' generation could say, just find a building with vacancies and you'll get a deal. Here is the number that breaks that rule. Vacancy sits meaningfully above what economists consider healthy, 7 to 9% empty, compared to the 5% or so that used to be the tipping point where landlords started sweating. That same window, rents did not fall. They kept climbing. It's like watching a store with an overflowing stockroom raise the price of the thing it can't sell. When something in an economy looks impossible, it is worth asking who benefits from you not noticing. Let's meet the person on the other side of your lease. Her name is Denise. She is a regional property manager for a mid-size ownership group, not a slumlord, not a villain in a movie. Woman with a badge lanyard and a Keurig in her office who genuinely believes she is running her properties professionally. Denise oversees 6 buildings. 2 of them, right now, are sitting at 84% occupancy, which by any traditional read of the market means she is losing money every single day those units sit dark. Rent for a vacant unit is 0. Rent for a filled unit, even a slightly discounted one, is not 0. Week those units sit empty should be a week Denise is panicking. Denise is not panicking. Denise has a piece of software on her desktop that tells her not to. This is where we get to the actual mechanism, the thing nobody puts in the headline. It's called revenue management software. If you've ever wondered why the price of a hotel room or an airline seat seems to move on its own, hour by hour, this is the residential real estate version of that same idea, except it was never supposed to work this way for apartments. Hotel room that doesn't sell tonight is gone forever. An apartment that doesn't rent this month is still sitting there next month. The economics are fundamentally different. And yet, here's roughly how the tool works, stripped of the marketing language. Denise doesn't set her own prices anymore, not really. She logs into a dashboard, and the dashboard has already priced every unit in her 6 buildings. Based on a model that pulls in enormous amounts of data, what comparable buildings nearby are charging, what her own historical lease-up speed looks like, what the algorithm estimates renters in that zip code are willing to pay before they walk, and critically, what dozens or hundreds of other buildings using the exact same software, owned by entirely different companies, are also charging, updated daily. That last part is the whole story. Denise is not just pricing against the market. She is pricing alongside a network of competitors who are all looking at data aggregated by the same company, all getting recommendations shaped by the same underlying model. A normal market, if Denise's building is 84% full, the textbook move is obvious. Cut the price until it fills. But the software isn't just telling her what price will fill the building. It's telling her what price will maximize revenue across her whole portfolio. The math frequently says that keeping 16% of units empty at a higher price generates more total revenue than filling 100% of units at a price low enough to actually clear the market. Say that plainly. It can be more profitable to leave the lights off in 4 apartments than to rent all 20 for less. Why would that ever be true? Because rent isn't priced unit by unit in a vacuum. It's priced as a portfolio over time, with an eye toward the fact that every dollar you concede on a new lease also drags down what you can charge on renewals. If Denise drops new unit pricing by 10% to fill those last few apartments fast, she doesn't just lose margin on those units, she resets the market comp that her own renewal pricing gets measured against. And that comp gets fed straight back into the software for every other building in the network. One discount ripples outward and quietly taxes thousands of renewals that were never advertised anywhere. So the software does the unemotional thing. It holds the line. It would rather show you a beautiful, empty, freshly painted Unit 4C for 6 more weeks than rent it to you $150 cheaper and have that number show up in a database that every other landlord in the metro can see. You are not imagining that this feels different from how markets are supposed to work. It is different. In a genuinely competitive market, no single actor is big enough to hold prices above the clearing level for long, because someone else will always undercut them to capture the customer. What's changed isn't that landlords got greedier. Landlords have always wanted more money. What changed is that thousands of independently owned buildings are now effectively looking at the same spreadsheet. They don't need to call each other on the phone and agree to hold prices high. The software does something functionally similar without anyone breaking a law in the obvious sense. Regulators looked at this arrangement and decided it deserved a much harder look, filing suit against one of the largest revenue management platforms in the industry, alleging that pooling competitors' private pricing data functions an awful lot like old-fashioned price coordination in a modern disguise. That case is still working its way through the courts as I'm recording this, so hold the outcome loosely. The company disputes the characterization, so hold the outcome loosely. But the fact that regulators looked at everyone uses the same pricing brain and thought this smells like collusion should tell you something. Here's the part that makes it worse for you specifically. Want to be honest that this next section is going to feel a little conspiratorial, because it kind of is. Except it's happening in plain sight with quarterly earnings calls to prove it. This only works if landlords can actually afford to eat the vacancy. Mom-and-pop owner with one triplex and a mortgage due on the first of the month cannot afford to leave a unit dark. She needs the cash flow. She will drop the price. That's why, historically, small independent landlords have been the ones keeping the whole rental market honest. The competitive pressure valve. The guy down the street willing to take less because he actually needs a tenant this month. But the share of rental units owned by small independent landlords has been shrinking for years, steadily replaced by large institutional owners, private equity-backed portfolios, REITs, national management companies, that can own tens of thousands of units across dozens of metros. And an owner with 10,000 units doesn't experience an empty apartment the way a mom-and-pop owner does. 10,000 units generating slightly lower average rent for one extra month is a rounding error on a balance sheet. With access to cheap institutional capital, that owner can afford patience in a way no small landlord ever could, and patience is what lets the price hold. Let's put a face on the other side of this. Meet Tomas. Tomas has been trying to rent an apartment for 4 months. Not because nothing is available. He has toured 11 units in 3 buildings that were sitting mostly empty. Every single leasing agent told him the same thing with a straight face. The market rate for this unit is $250. Not let's talk, not what can you afford, a fixed number that felt oddly, suspiciously identical across buildings. Owned by completely different companies that, as far as Tomas could tell, had no relationship to each other at all. Tomas did the thing almost nobody does. He asked the leasing agent directly, "How is this price set?" And the agent, who was 24 years old and genuinely didn't know the deeper mechanics, said the honest, unsettling thing. "The system generates it. I just don't have the authority to go below it." The owner decided, not market conditions. The system generates it. Tomas was negotiating against a number that no human being in that building had the power to change, because the actual decision maker was a subscription service running on a server somewhere else entirely, optimizing for a portfolio Tomas would never see, across buildings he'd never heard of, using a dataset built partly from his own rejected offers on the 11 units before this one. That's the part that should genuinely bother you. Every time you walk away from a unit because the price felt too high, you're not just losing that apartment. You're contributing a tiny data point that helps recalibrate the model for the next renter walking through that same door. Your resistance gets absorbed and priced in. It's not that landlords are reading your mind. It's that the aggregate behavior of thousands of renters like you, fed back into a shared system, produces something that behaves almost exactly like mind reading. At scale, continuously, for free. Now, some honest caveats, because I will not build you a conspiracy theory that collapses the second someone fact-checks it. Revenue management software did not invent high rent. Rent has been climbing for structural reasons that have nothing to do with algorithms. Construction costs went up. Financing costs went up after rates rose. Local zoning in most American cities makes it painfully slow and expensive to build enough new housing to match population growth in the places people actually want to live. None of that is the software's fault. The software didn't create the underlying scarcity. What it did was take a market that already had scarcity baked in and made that scarcity more efficiently monetized than a fragmented market of independent mom-and-pop landlords ever could have managed on their own. Scarcity was already there. The software just got very, very good at making sure none of that scarcity ever accidentally benefited you. And here's the other honest caveat. Not every empty apartment you drive past is a revenue management play. A unit is genuinely between renovations. A building really is struggling and just hasn't dropped the sign yet. Because updating marketing takes longer than updating a spreadsheet. You cannot look at one dark window and diagnose an algorithm. What you're looking for is the pattern, persistently elevated vacancy across a metro, existing alongside persistently rising rent. For multiple years running, in markets where a huge share of large buildings are owned or managed by companies using shared pricing tools. That combination, held over time, is the fingerprint. One building proves nothing. A metro full of them starts to look like a structure. So why doesn't this get fixed the way markets are supposed to self-correct? Because the group that would normally break this, an ambitious landlord willing to undercut everyone, has a much weaker incentive to do that. Remember, most large owners are on the same software, looking at the same recommendations. The system isn't asking any individual building to charge the absolute maximum. It's optimizing each building against its neighbors in a way that keeps the whole cluster elevated together. Undercutting the cluster doesn't just cost that landlord margin on the units they fill faster. It drags the comp down for every renewal in their own portfolio, and every other portfolio nearby using the same tool. There's genuinely more money, individually and collectively, in everyone holding the line than in anyone breaking ranks. That's not a conspiracy in the smoke-filled room sense. It's a Nash equilibrium wearing a leasing office polo shirt. And it is, in its own bloodless way, one of the more elegant pieces of financial engineering happening in this economy right now. For the people who built it, considerably less elegant for Tomas. Let's talk numbers, because I promised you arithmetic and not just outrage. Independent economic analyses of this pricing behavior have estimated renters in affected markets pay an extra few $100s a year. Compared to what a fully competitive market would have produced, with estimates for the most affected buildings running considerably higher. Some done by academic researchers, some by consumer advocacy groups, some contested by the industry itself, so hold the precision loosely. Multiply a modest few $100 annual premium across the tens of millions of units in large multi-family buildings nationally, and you are talking about a genuinely enormous transfer of wealth from renters to owners, extracted not through any single dramatic price hike you'd notice and get angry about, but through thousands of tiny, defensible-sounding, algorithmically generated numbers that each look individually reasonable, and collectively add up to a very different story. And notice what that transfer requires. It requires you to never quite have the full picture. It requires the number on your renewal notice to look like it came from the market, rather than a specific, identifiable software decision. That could, in theory, have gone differently. It requires Denise to be able to say, honestly from her seat, I didn't set this price. I don't really control this price. And be telling the truth, while the aggregate effect of thousands of Denises adds up to something that behaves exactly like coordinated pricing power, without anyone at any single company having to feel like they did anything wrong.